There are some recipes that feel like they carry the whole history of a place in just one bite, and bolinho de bacalhau is exactly that kind of dish. Crispy on the outside, soft and flavorful on the inside, it has that unmistakable taste of Brazilian tradition that instantly brings to mind lively bars, family tables, and long conversations that always seem to happen around good food. Just imagining a tray of these little croquettes coming out hot and golden already makes the kitchen feel warmer. What I love about this recipe is how simple it is, and yet how special it becomes when each step is done with care. Desalted codfish, potatoes, parsley, and eggs come together to form a mixture that is humble at first glance, but full of character once it hits the pan. It is one of those preparations that doesn't need sophistication to impress. It just needs attention, patience, and the right balance of ingredients. And that balance starts before anything is mixed, because the codfish must be properly desalted. That detail may seem small, but it changes everything in the final result. You know that feeling when a dish is so familiar it almost seems to greet you? Bolinho de bacalhau has that kind of presence. It appears at gatherings, at birthdays, at festive weekends, and even at simple get-togethers where someone says, "Let's just make something tasty." There's a comfort in that. It speaks to Brazilian food culture in a very direct way, with flavor that feels honest and a texture that invites you to reach for one more. And there's another reason this recipe deserves attention. Besides being delicious, it's also rich in protein, which makes it even more satisfying. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I prepare the dough, shape the croquettes, and fry them until they turn beautifully crisp and golden. I'll also point out the mistake that can ruin everything if you're not careful, because a great bolinho depends on getting that first step right. If you enjoy Brazilian recipes like this, take a moment to leave a like, and tell me in the comments what you're most curious about when it comes to Brazil. And if you want more recipes that bring tradition straight to your kitchen, stay with me, because the next step is where this classic really starts to come together. The first thing I do is make sure the cod is truly ready, because this is where the whole recipe either wins or loses. If the fish still carries too much salt, the flavor becomes harsh and throws everything off. So I take my time, changing the water as needed, until the cod reaches that perfect point where it tastes clean, balanced, and ready to blend into the potato. That patience is part of the secret, and it's one of those details that separates a good bolinho from one that people remember. Once the cod is desalted, I break it into delicate flakes and mix it with the mashed potatoes, finely chopped parsley, and eggs. At this stage, the kitchen starts to feel alive with aroma and texture. The mixture should be firm enough to shape, but still soft and moist, with that classic homemade look that Brazilian cooking does so well. I always think this is the moment when the recipe begins to show its personality, because every spoonful carries a little bit of tradition. Then comes the shaping, which is simple but satisfying. I like to form the little croquettes by hand, giving each one a compact shape so they fry evenly and keep their structure. There's something comforting about seeing them lined up before frying, all similar but never exactly the same, as if each one has its own character. It feels like the kind of food you'd bring to the table when family is already gathered and the conversation is easy. And of course, no one wants a soggy bolinho, so the frying has to be just right. The oil should be hot enough to create that instant golden crust, sealing the outside while keeping the inside tender. As soon as they hit the pan, you can hear the gentle sizzle that promises something delicious is on the way. A few minutes later, they come out beautifully golden and crisp, with a texture that makes it hard to wait. This is the kind of appetizer that brings people closer without much effort. It belongs in a casual afternoon with friends, on a festive table, or beside a cold drink in a good Brazilian bar. And if you've ever wondered why bolinho de bacalhau is so loved, maybe it's because it tastes like celebration, even on an ordinary day. If you're enjoying this recipe so far, leave a like, and tell me in the comments what you're most curious to know about Brazil. Because there's still more to see, and the next step makes all the difference. Once the cod has been properly desalted, everything becomes much easier, and that is exactly where this recipe starts to come together. I like to shred the fish carefully and check for any small bones, because that attention to detail makes a big difference in the final texture. Then I add the potatoes, already cooked and mashed while still warm, so they blend smoothly with the cod. The smell is simple, comforting, and very Brazilian in the best way possible. Next come the parsley and the eggs, which help bring the mixture together and give it a fresher, richer character. At this stage, the dough should be firm enough to shape, but still soft enough to feel delicate in your hands. If it is too wet, the croquettes may lose their shape in the oil. If it is too dry, they can turn heavy instead of light. So the secret is not rushing this part. I mix slowly, feeling the texture, until it reaches that perfect balance that makes Bolinho de Bacalhau so loved. Then comes one of the most satisfying moments, shaping the little croquettes. You can make them by hand, using 2 spoons, or with a small portion scoop if you prefer a more even size. There is something almost nostalgic about this step, as if each piece carries a bit of family tradition with it. In many Brazilian homes, this is the kind of recipe that brings people into the kitchen without even being asked. Someone watches, someone comments, someone tastes a little bit of the dough before it goes to the fire. The frying is where the transformation really happens. As soon as the bolinhos hit the hot oil, they begin to take on a beautiful golden color, and the kitchen fills with that irresistible aroma that makes everyone start asking when they will be ready. They need just enough time to become crisp on the outside while staying tender inside. That contrast is what makes the first bite so satisfying. You hear the crunch, then the soft, savory center follows, full of flavor and warmth. And this is exactly why it is so important to desalt the cod properly. If that step is missed, the whole balance changes, and the final result can become too salty and unpleasant. But when it is done right, the flavor is clean, rich, and perfectly seasoned, allowing the cod to shine alongside the potato and parsley. It is a simple dish, but one that rewards care and patience. I always think recipes like this say a lot about Brazilian food culture. They are generous, practical, and meant to be shared. A tray of Bolinho de Bacalhau can turn an ordinary afternoon into a celebration, and that is part of its charm. If you are enjoying this recipe with me, leave a like so more people can find it too. And I have to ask, what are you most curious about Brazil? I would love to know. Stay with me, because in the next part I'll show you how to finish them perfectly and serve them the way they deserve. Once the cod has been properly desalted and the potatoes are soft and ready, everything starts to come together in a way that feels almost comforting. The kitchen fills with that unmistakable aroma of homemade food, the kind that immediately brings back memories of family tables, Sunday lunch, and conversations that seem to last a little longer when something delicious is being prepared. At this point, the texture matters just as much as the flavor. The potato helps bind the mixture, the cod brings its salty depth, and the parsley adds that fresh, unmistakable Brazilian touch that brightens the whole recipe. As I mix everything gently, the dough begins to take shape, and that is when the magic really starts. It should be firm enough to mold, but still soft enough to keep that tender bite inside. There's a kind of satisfaction in feeling the mixture respond under your hands, knowing that each little croquette will become crisp on the outside and delicate on the inside. That contrast is exactly what makes Bolinho de Bacalhau so loved across Brazil. It is simple, yes, but never ordinary. Then comes the shaping, which is one of the most charming parts of the recipe. Small portions are taken by hand and formed one by one, almost like little promises of flavor waiting for their turn in the hot oil. Some people like them slightly round, others more oval, and in truth, there is room for personal touch here. That's part of what makes Brazilian home cooking so special. Every family seems to have its own way of doing things, and each version carries its own memory. When the croquettes finally meet the oil, the transformation is immediate. The surface starts to bubble, then slowly turns golden, and the kitchen becomes alive with that soft frying sound that always signals something good is coming. It is important not to rush this step. A steady temperature helps the outside become beautifully crisp while keeping the inside moist and flavorful. That balance is what everyone hopes for when the first batch comes out of the pan. And if you've ever had Bolinho de Bacalhau at a bar or a festive gathering, you already know the joy of that first bite. It's crunchy, warm, and deeply satisfying. It feels familiar, but at the same time, it never loses its charm. Now, I want to know from you, what part of Brazil are you most curious about? And if you're enjoying this recipe, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, because there's still more to see before we finish. While the cod and potatoes are already well combined, I like to pause for a moment and notice the texture of the dough. It should feel firm enough to shape, but still soft and inviting in the hands. That balance is what gives Bolinho de Bacalhau its character, not too heavy, not too dry, just enough to hold together and fry into that beautiful, rustic shell. At this stage, the kitchen starts to smell like home, and you can already imagine the first bite, warm and savory, with the flavor of the sea coming through in every mouthful. If you've ever tasted this snack in a Brazilian bar, you know exactly the kind of pleasure it brings. It arrives at the table simple and unpretentious, yet somehow it always disappears first. That is the charm of traditional Brazilian cooking. It doesn't need to be complicated to be memorable. A few well-chosen ingredients, prepared with care, are enough to create something that feels special enough for a holiday, but comforting enough for a quiet afternoon at home. When I shape each little croquette, I try to keep them consistent in size so they fry evenly. There's something satisfying about seeing them lined up before they hit the oil, each one ready to turn into a golden bite of tradition. And this is where the patience pays off. The oil needs to be hot enough to crisp the outside quickly, but not so hot that it burns before the inside warms through. That steady frying is what gives them that irresistible contrast, crunchy on the outside, tender on the inside. This is also the moment to remember that one detail that can make all the difference: the cod has to be properly desalted. If that step is rushed, the flavor can become too strong and upset the balance of the whole recipe. But when it's done right, the result is clean, rich, and deeply satisfying. It's one of those lessons that every good recipe teaches quietly, through practice and attention. And honestly, that's part of why so many people love dishes like this. They carry memory, technique, and affection in the same bite. Bolinho de bacalhau isn't just a snack, it's a small celebration of Brazilian taste and tradition. If you're enjoying this process with me, take a moment to leave a like, and tell me in the comments what you're most curious about Brazil. And if you want to keep exploring more recipes like this, stay close, because there's still one last detail that will make these little croquettes even better. And there you have it, a tray of bolinho de bacalhau that looks simple at first glance, but carries all the warmth of Brazilian tradition in every bite. When they come out of the oil, golden and crisp, with that soft, seasoned center, it's hard not to stop for just a moment and enjoy the smell, the texture, and the feeling of making something truly classic at home. This is the kind of recipe that doesn't need any exaggeration to impress. It speaks for itself. What really makes all the difference is respecting each step, especially the desalting of the cod. That part may seem small, but it changes everything in the final flavor. Once the balance is right, the mixture comes together beautifully with the potatoes, parsley, and eggs, creating a dough that is easy to shape and even easier to love. And because it is rich in protein, it ends up being more than just a snack. It becomes a satisfying option for a family table, a weekend gathering, or that special moment when you want to serve something with a little more meaning. Bolinho de bacalhau is one of those recipes that feels familiar, almost like it has always belonged in Brazilian homes and celebrations. You can imagine it being passed around at a bar table, served beside a cold drink, or brought out proudly during a family get-together. It has that comforting, shared quality that makes people come back for one more. If you enjoyed this recipe, leave a like to support the channel and help more people discover Brazilian cooking like this. And tell me in the comments, what are you most curious about Brazil? I always love reading your questions and ideas. If you want to keep exploring Brazilian flavors with me, subscribe so you don't miss the next recipe. There's always something delicious waiting to be made, and I'd love to have you here for the next one.